So I've got 4 engines here, 224, 1666, 2026 I believe, and a 2018. Now these 4 engines are very similar engines. The boiler for the 224 was reused on the 1666. Then they adapted that mold for the 2026 and a whole bunch of other engines, including this 2018. What I'm going to show you actually on this 2018 applies to all these engines. The placement might be a little different. As you can see, they moved the E-unit from the front to the back, but it's still pretty much the same engine. We got the boiler, you got the pilot assembly, front truck, rear truck, and the motor. The first thing I would do is take off the rear truck. Sometimes these are attached to one piece, sometimes they're 2 pieces. You will find a decent amount of variation with those pieces. The front, it's usually 2 screws right here. You can lift this out, usually depending how long the wire is from the headlight. That doesn't want to move any further, so we're just going to leave it there at the moment. The next thing to do is I'm going to remove the side rods. You can pull this part out. Same thing on the other side. You can take this bolt out. I use a socket and a driver. This particular engine has that bolt, has the rod, and has this spacer. This particular bolt is a 1/4 inch. There are a few different sizes. I don't know what they all are. I just happen to know this one because that's the one I'm working on at the moment. Now you might find the rods are slightly bent. Most of the time you can just bend them back a little bit. You want to try to keep it as straight as possible. So earlier I put a little oil on this bar that holds the back of the motor in place. Now with these, some of them screw out, some of them press out. I really don't like them because to get them to move sometimes you have to bang on them, and I always feel like at some point I'm going to break off this section of the shell. But I haven't had a problem yet. That being said, don't hit it too hard. I just use a little Phillips head and lay it on that side there and tap it a few times with a screwdriver or something. Not very hard. And you'll see it pops out the other side. Now make sure that the side you're hitting is not the side that has these grooves in it. You want to pop those grooves out of the side of the casting. So you can see it has come out the side a little bit. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go back to the front of the engine. And I'm going to take these screws out here. Neither of these screws that are in this are the original ones. When I put it back together, I'll try to find something that's a little more appropriate for this spot. Now, I use a pocket screwdriver with a little magnet on the end, which can help when you're retrieving small parts, but it can also be very annoying because you put it down and then things stick to it. Okay, I took the 2 screws out. It should then lift off as a separate piece. Now, a lot of these vary slightly from engine to engine. But the removal is almost always the same. You know, I took the 2 screws out for the bulb holder, then I took the 2 screws out that hold the casting part together. It's the smoke unit. Sometimes this bar is separate and will come out. It will really only fit one way, but it's a good time to take a look at it and see which way it goes. And if you're not comfortable, take a picture of it before going further, just so that you can look back at that and see how it goes together. In this situation, I'm going to pull this out. You will see that it's the lever, this part, and then the piston or whatever is attached to it. A lot of times these are separate and will fall out. They can also get stuck in the top portion. I have found what's worked for me is to soak, if it's stuck together, soak it with WD-40 and let it sit for as long as possible, and then eventually it might come apart. Apparently it makes a nice bell too, I've never noticed that. We loosened the post through the back. We've taken everything off the front. We're gonna flip it over. We're gonna take this screw out. And this screw goes through the top of the boiler into the frame for the motor. This engine feels like it has not come apart in a very long time. Sometimes the screw will be right there. Sometimes it might be towards the back of the boiler, as it is on the 224. And sometimes there isn't one up top at all. And what I like about the 1666 is it does not have that post to bang out. It's held in by this bracket here. So you would take that bracket out and that would loosen the back. And then you take off the front and that would loosen the front. Once you have the bulb holder out, you can just swing it to the side and it comes off. So now we have the mechanisms loose because we took the screw out of the top. There is now not so much tension on this post. We should be able to get it out easier. Put my screwdriver back in the side and give it a couple more taps. There we go. And it should eventually just loosen up. So those are the splines at the end, and that's what holds it in, so you don't want to really damage those. So now that that's out, we pick the whole motor assembly up out of the shell. This spot here sits on here, and that's what centers and holds the shell in place. We have the motor assembly, you have the bulb holder, you have the smoke unit, you have the E unit, you have the brush plate. I think they call this a bearing plate. They might call it something else, I don't really know. The positive is picked up through the center rail, through these rollers, and comes up to this spot right here on the E unit. So if you're going to be reattaching or attaching a headlight or a smoke unit, their positive wires need to come over to this spot here. And then everything grounds just through the chassis. So you'll see that the headlight only has one wire. The smoke unit only has one wire. That's because everything grounds through the chassis and through the outer rails of the track. To remove an E unit, there's always one screw. There are 4 holes, 2 on each side, but there's usually one screw. You take that out and it lifts up. With this plate, you just take those screws out, it comes off. In this particular motor, the smoke unit is screwed to the side of the frame. It's not always like that, sometimes it's separate, but the wiring is always the same on those. So take those 2 screws out and you can lift up the brush plate. Now, depending how often it's come apart or how recently, it might not come right off. I just use my pocket screwdriver and just wiggle it around the sides until it moves freely, and that is with like 0 pressure on it. Then you just pull it up straight up off the shaft of the armature. The brush plate comes off. It's called the brush plate because it holds the brushes. The other major part is the armature, and that's this piece here. If I say the armature shaft, that's just the center post of the armature. So if you're going to take your engine apart, well, there are a couple basic spots you want to clean. And this is what you do. This is what I do whenever I buy one. So I do what I'm doing now. I take it apart. I make sure the wires are soldered nicely. A lot of times, right at the edge, you might see a little green right before it's soldered. And that would indicate that the solder or the wire is rotting a little. And while you might look at it and say that looks like a good connection, if you move the wire back and forth a couple times, it's most likely going to snap off. I would be very careful moving anything because, especially in this one, these wires look pretty old. So I don't want to break anything off that I don't need to. So what I'm going to do first is just wipe off the armature face with a Q-tip, and you see all that gunk on there. And that gunk is what's keeping the engine from running. So I'm going to just get a little bit of rubbing alcohol on the Q-tip and gently clean the face of the armature. And you can also clean the shaft a little bit because you're going to want to oil that, because a lot of times the shaft gets dry and can make a kind of an interesting squeaking noise So you just want to get that cleaned. Another thing you want to do, and maybe you don't want to do it with the screwdriver, but is just gently go in between the sections to clean out any carbon buildup, and that will help it run better as well. Take a paper towel and wipe off the face, pick up any of the excess alcohol. So it still looks pretty dirty. Just going to gently rub it across each section. And a nice and clean armature would be nice and, you know, copper colored. So this one's still a bit dirty, but the little bit of cleaning I'm doing is enough to make it run a lot better than it was, because it wasn't running. So that is usually enough to get it to work a little better. Another spot you want to clean the carbon off of is the brushes. So the bottom of that is black. Unless you're doing a really immaculate job of cleaning it, I usually just wipe them down with a paper towel. On a heavily used engine, you'll want to replace these. They're not worn excessively or on an angle, so I'm just going to reuse those. Another thing you need to do is clean up the spots where the brushes sit. You need to be careful, because you will see inside there's a spring, and you can catch a Q-tip on that and bend it all out of whack, and then your brushes aren't going to work properly. Up and down, cleaning the bore. And you might get a little Q-tip stuck in there, some little fibers. You don't want to leave those there. Now, before you put that brush plate back on, one of the things you want to do is see that the brushes move. So put one in place and just push it in. If it pops right back out, then it's clean enough to work. If you push it in and it doesn't come back out, then go back and clean it a little more. Very rarely I've come across one of these being bent and had to kind of squeeze it back into shape. But most of the time, if the brush doesn't move, it's just because there's still dirt in there. Now, this can be tricky. There are different ways to do it. What I have decided I like is I take the brushes with the groove and put them towards the top of the brush plate, and then I drop it. They are very easy to drop. And then I just move the rest of it into place. It's probably a little hard to show, but now the plate is down and the brushes are in place. If I let go of it, it's going to pop up because those springs are pushing against the brushes. And then just gently find where it wants to sit, make sure everything still turns, and then put the screws back in. If you're looking for more in-depth repair videos, I definitely have those. So just take a look back through the last year or so. I have some on specific engines, and a lot of the stuff from any of the videos can be translated to other engines. The concepts are pretty much the same, even if the parts are a little different. So that little bit of cleaning on the brushes should make it work when I put it back on the track. Matter of fact, now would be a good time to test that before putting it back together, because putting something all the way back together and then having it not work is just really annoying. That's not bad considering it didn't work before. It definitely sounds like it needs some lubrication. Okay, so at least now I know that putting it back together won't be a waste of time. I'm going to put a drop of oil there on the armature shaft, just a drop, especially on this style, just a drop. Any more than that, it's just going to get all over the armature face, and then it's not going to run properly. I'm also going to put a drop on this side. Spin that in. On the post where that gear sits. And if you can see any others, you can do that too. It's also a good time to put a little bit of oil on the axles. So I just put a drop on each side, right by the frame, spin it a little bit. The front and the back are usually pretty easy to get to. The middle one can be a little harder, but that's why these little holes are here. So I try to just do a drop and spin it and see how it does. You can also at this point put a little grease on the gear down here. The grease will spread from gear to gear, but I'll put a little on the front and the rear. Actually, I like to do all three. Again, not too much. You don't want to over grease it because then it's going to make a mess. So that is your basic Lionel 262 or 264. Not a lot there, but it seems like a lot when you haven't taken one apart yet. I remember feeling like that when the first time I took it apart, I didn't know what I was looking at. So take an older engine. Pretty common and basic engine and a good place to start fiddling. One other thing to note before you put it back together, since you've been moving things around, is just get a look at the wires, make sure they're still attached. I've definitely had instances where everything was good and then I put it back together and one of these wires had popped off. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Dagryffyn Hobby.